Hey, what's up? Adam Lobo here from Adam Lobo TV. So the time has come for me to do yet another smartphone comparison video, and this time around, I gave you a bunch of options on my YouTube community tab and the type of comparison videos for you guys to choose for me to do. As doing this kind of videos is not as easy as just sitting in front of the camera and telling you which is better, because not only I need to test both phones at the same time properly, but I also need to show you the camera samples, the battery test screenshots, and any other findings that I find when I do the comparison. And out of all the options that I gave, you have requested me to do a comparison video between the Poco F3 against the newly introduced Xiaomi 11T. So here is my in-depth comparison to help you make a purchase decision. Now, starting from the phone's hardware, in terms of the chipset, the Poco F3 comes with a Snapdragon 870 chipset, which is a 7nm process, and the Xiaomi 11T comes with a MediaTek Dimensity 1200 chipset, which is a 6nm process, and yes, both phones are 5G phones. Then when it comes to the phone's build quality, both phones were the same size, but the Xiaomi 11T was a bit thicker and also heavier due to its larger battery, and it's also because the 11T has a better Corning Gorilla Glass Victus compared to only version 5 on the Poco F3. Now, like the previous comparison of the Poco X3 GT, it had this similar glossy glass back finish, which is down to a personal preference. So for me, I still not only prefer the amazing white finish on the Poco F3, but I also love the matte finish, obviously, since it doesn't attract any smudges or fingerprints as well. And because of this, the Poco F3 does feel better in my hands, and it sort of gels into your hands compared to carrying a slightly thick and a heavier form factor of the 11T. Now, in terms of the camera bump, due to the largest sensor on the Xiaomi 11T, you will find it bigger than the Poco F3, but because the camera bump is a bit more squared on the edges, the phone doesn't wobble as much as the Poco F3 when you're typing it on the surface. Next, in terms of the ports and buttons, looking down below, it was exactly the same, where both phones does not have a micro SD card slot, so it only has a dual SIM. Then on the right, you'll find the same placements of the volume rockers and the same tactile feeling of the side power button and fingerprint sensor, and it seems like a very good blessing that Xiaomi is using this kind of a fingerprint button compared to the concave style which had on the Mi 10T Pro last year. And yes, it still unlocks really quickly, and there was no difference comparing both phones. Now, looking on top, since both phones have stereo speakers, you'll find the same additional speakers over here, but just a little different arrangement for the speakers on the Poco F3, where the IR blaster on the Poco F3 is very close to the speakers, making it look like it's part of the speakers. So yes, I'm sure you have already guessed by now, if I really had to choose between these two phones in terms of the design, build, and using the phone daily, I would go with the Poco F3. Now, this is because while it is nice to have a solid phone with the Corning Gorilla Glass Victus protection and all, I humbly feel that if Xiaomi wants to go with a thicker form factor like this, they should probably go with a more squared off design like the iPhones or the Oppo Reno 6 series, as while those phones are thick, but it does feel easier to grip, and it does not give me that sort of anxiety of dropping the phone. This does. Now let's look at the displays. As mentioned, since both phones are the same size, it has the same 6.67-inch display with the same resolution of 1080 by 2400 pixels. Now, both phones have AMOLED screens at 120Hz refresh rate, where the Poco F3 uses Samsung's E4 AMOLED panel, and there's no official listing on what exact panel is being used on the 11T, where some online research suggests that it is using the panel from the subsidiary company of TCL. So yes, I'll check back on that. Now, according to paper, the Poco has a way higher brightness value, up to 1300 nits compared to 800 nits on the 11T. But just cracking both phone screens up to maximum, to the naked eye, it does seem almost the same on a normal lighting condition. But you may see only a tiny bit difference during a very bright daylight. So I wouldn't say that the 11T was not visible, as it was very visible even during a bright sunlight. And also worth mentioning is that the adaptive brightness on the 11T was just the right brightness for me, where the Poco F3 seems to be a bit brighter than what I feel that it needs to be at. Now in terms of playback on Netflix, both have HDR playback support as seen in the content which has support for that, and both phones have wideband L1 rate and Full HD playback resolution. But guys, I did expect the 11T to have Dolby Vision at least, because the Pro variant has that, so it was equally as good as the Poco F3. And since the display playback quality was about the same, you'll expect very similar or identical results when it comes to watching videos on Netflix, YouTube, and using the phone daily. So with this guys, I can guarantee that you love both phone screens, and I'll give it a draw when it comes to using both phones daily. Next, onto the phone's cameras. The Poco F3's rear cameras comes with a 48 megapixel f1.8 aperture, an 8 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide angle lens, and a 5 megapixel f2.4 macro lens. Then as for the 11T, it has a way bigger 108 megapixel f1.8 aperture lens for the main, where the rest was the same camera arrays for the ultra wide and the macro lens as well. Then as for the front cameras, the Poco F3 has a bigger 20 megapixel f2.5 aperture, and the Xiaomi 11T has a 16 megapixel f2.5 aperture lens. So there are two questions going into this camera comparison. Are the bigger sensors on the 11T better than the Poco F3, or the Poco F3's front camera better than the front camera on the 11T? Well, starting from the high megapixel mode for the rear camera, on paper the Xiaomi 11T obviously has a bigger megapixel count, as seen on these images, as it looks practically identical, especially if you don't crop in or zoom in close. The only difference I would say is the color temperature, where it was cooler on the 11T and warmer on the Poco F3. Other than that, it's pretty much the same. Now looking at the main lenses, while both images looks very close to each other, you'll see that the images on the Poco F3 have a deeper black, and although in terms of the color accuracy, the Poco F3 was more true to life, I kinda prefer how the images looked straight out of the camera on the Xiaomi 11T on the main lenses. Then looking at this second picture, once again both looked really good, but if you really pixel peep, the strand of the clouds towards the middle left seems to be more pronounced on the 11T compared to the Poco F3, and this could be due to the bigger sensor. Now speaking of a bigger sensor, both phones can zoom digitally up to 10 times, and because of the bigger sensor, you'll get more details on the 11T once again when it comes to 10 times zoom. For the ultra-wide angle lens, I found that the image quality on the Poco F3 was better, as there were some contrast issues as seen at the leaves at the top right of the image, and the overall colors also seems to be a bit dull on the 11T as well. Then the second image shows a similar contrast brightness, and it even overexposed the cloud area right in the middle compared to how the Poco F3 was, which had retained the dynamic range and detail over there. Now looking at the macro shots, both had easier focusing during this mode, which was great to know. Now on the 11T, instead of a macro mode, is called super macro mode instead of just macro mode on the Poco F3. Now names aside, although the 11T seems to be getting an easier and a closer shot, as you guys can see, there is a huge over sharpening done in post, where the images on the Poco F3 was better, which had more balance on the overall image. And as seen in this second image, it seems like there was so much over sharpening done at the center of the 11T's image compared to a nicer looking and detailed overall image on the Poco F3 once again. Now as for the night mode on the ultra-wide angle lenses, personally I did not like how both phones were, as it is not the best at taking low light photos, as both phones was not easy to focus since they are not having any OIS. But if I really had to choose, I would go with the Poco F3 since the sky were more true to life in black color compared to a bluer color on the 11T. And as for the next shot of the bunch of downlights, as you can see, there are a lot of flare on the area of the light as opposed to how nicely detailed the picture was on the Poco F3. Then as for the main lenses for the night shots, both were almost the same, and the photos on the Poco F3 again were more color accurate on the skies for this image, but it was sharper on the Xiaomi 11T. Then finally, when it comes to the super low light situations, here's where the 11T was better due to its larger sensor, as the images on the Poco F3 had some weird artifacts around the pool area and some jagged edges around the floor as well. Now, as for the selfie shots, to be completely honest, I was not a fan for the pictures on both of the phones, as this has to be one of the biggest weakness for any Xiaomi phones, even their flagships. But when comparing both regular selfie photos, both the background of the pictures are overexposed, as there were no details in the sky area, but the skin tones look better on the Poco F3. Then the image quality for this second pic for the Mi 11 looked very grainy on the blacks, and once again the skin tones on the Poco F3 was way better. Then as for the portrait selfie, both images failed on getting a good age detection, but there was better details on the skin once again for the Poco F3. Then as for video recording, both phones maximizes at 4K 30 frames per second for the rear cameras. The quality of the video was great, so was the image stabilization, and the 11T records Dolby audio recording. Then the footage for the ultra-wide angle lenses for both phones maxes out at 1080p, where the video quality was just okay, but great image stabilization. As for the front video recording, both only records up to 1080p, where the Poco F3 goes up to 60 frames per second instead of only 30 frames per second on the 11T. While the image stabilization was equally as good, but the video footage on the 11T just looks super horrible, as you guys can see, compared to the Poco F3. So guys, with this, do let me know, do you think that the Poco F3 or the Xiaomi 11T perform better in every aspect of the cameras? Let me know at the comment section below. Now in terms of the audio quality, both sounded very similar on the highs and the mids, but the bass was better on the 11T. But in terms of the maximum volume output, the Poco F3 goes up to 96.2 dB and the Xiaomi 11T goes to a value of 93.8 dB. And here is a quick sound test. Now if you guys are enjoying this video comparison so far, be sure to give this video a nice big thumbs up, and a subscription to this channel would be very much appreciated. Now as for the battery specs, the Poco F3 comes with 4520 mAh of battery, and the Xiaomi 11T comes with a larger 5000 mAh of battery. And based on my daily usage, size does matter this time around, because although there is a huge improvement on the screen on time on the Poco F3, but the Xiaomi 11T got a total of 12 hours and 5 minutes of screen on time when it was still at 35% battery, compared to 12 hours and 12 minutes on the Poco F3 when it was only at 10% battery. But also where the Xiaomi 11T wins is through its fast charging, where it supports up to a massive 67 watts compared to only 33 watts on the Poco F3. So yes, this does come down to a personal preference whether you need a better screen on time or a faster charging. So the current software version that I was at during this review for the Poco F3 is MIUI version 12.5.3, whereas the Xiaomi 11T was at version 12.5.2, which for the life of me I cannot understand why. Yes, there is a difference where the Poco F3 is using the Poco skin and this is using the Xiaomi skin, but again, I don't think there is any difference, especially if you are a general user. Now while this is not my preferred Android skin, using both phones daily did not give me any issues. And being the kind of person who has been using lots of MIUI devices in this channel, gone are the days where there were lots of bugs and issues. So that's a great thing to know. However, I really think that it is about time that we all get a brand new MIUI version 13 already, rather than giving us a tons of decibels at the back. So Xiaomi, it's either you give us a brand new MIUI or give us stock Android back again, right? But with the promise of 3 Android OS updates and 4 years of security patches, it does make the 11T a very considerable option. Then as for gaming, as usual I started off with Genshin Impact on the Poco F3, and ever since the phone was on the latest update, there were a lot of improvements on the overall thermals when playing games for a very long time. The battery drain on the Poco F3 was only about 2 to 3%, about 10 minutes of heavy gaming. Then as for the 11T, Genshin Impact also ran smoothly with no micro lag or any battery drain issues, like how the Poco X3 GT was, where the battery was just going mad after 50% battery. So it's nice that the 11T did not have such issues. So the battery drain was very close to the Poco F3 as well, with the same 60 FPS at medium settings and motion blur turned off on Genshin Impact. Then in terms of heat, the Xiaomi 11T did become as warm as the Poco F3, but only about 20 to 30 minutes of gameplay, but it does run a tad bit cooler on the Poco F3. Now as for playing PUBG Mobile, there were no issues at all for both phones, but the Poco F3 could go up to graphics at Ultra HD with frame rate set to Ultra, where the Xiaomi 11T could only maximize the graphics at a one step lower at HDR, where apparently Ultra HD is not yet available. But if I had to choose which is better for gaming, I would go with the Poco F3, due to the fact that it's nicer to hold because of its nice and thin form factor, because the 11T did make my hands a bit stiff after a really long time of gaming, since the phone is thicker as mentioned earlier. And for some strange reason, the Poco F3 was also a bit sharper during gameplay, especially when it comes to Genshin Impact. So in conclusion, I have to say that overall I have to give it to the reigning champion, the Poco F3. Because although the battery life or the charging speed is not the strongest feature, but just using this phone daily, and the pictures coming out from the phone, especially the front camera, makes this my choice compared to the Xiaomi 11T. Then as for the phone's price here in Malaysia, Xiaomi has just announced the price of the Xiaomi 11T, where it retails at 1,899 ringgit for the 8GB of RAM with 256GB of storage, and the Poco F3 currently retails at 1,669 ringgit with the same amount of RAM and storage, and yes, I will leave links down below for you to get either one. Alright guys, so I have made my choice, but I would love to know which you think won in this smartphone comparison, the Poco F3 or the new Xiaomi 11T. Let me know at the comment section below. Aside from that, thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this comparison video and found it helpful in making your purchase decision. My name is Adam Lobo and I'll see you in my next video.